Well, first I'll tell you about how it was with Hitler. We had to always sing a song with Hitler, and it said something like, "Today Germany is ours and tomorrow it will be the whole world." So he thought he was going to rule the whole world. Hitler had said at one time that once he was done with the Jews, he would get the Mormons. He hated the Mormons because they knew that our headquarters, so to speak, were in America. And he, of course, hated America. So I remember they went through our hymn book, and every song that had the word Zion in, they crossed it out, and we were not allowed to sing that in church.
From what I can remember, almost daily there was air raids coming on. Planes flying over, sirens would go off, and we would have to get into a bomb shelter. We were expecting the conditions to get worse. That Rose went out to live in a country where the school was not being interrupted.
So I went to an LDS family, and they were very, very nice people in Vobezde, it was called. It was a very small village, and it was not a bad time. We were kind of glad and thankful that we could stay there. So I had to live with them. First my mom and the little children were there, and my sister. But after a while, my mom and the little children went back to Danzig to be with my dad.
The Russians were coming in, and all the LDS members were asked to leave. But my father's mother, she probably needed a hip replacement. She had a hip ailment, and she could not walk very good without pain. And so he said, let's just stay here. I built us this little fallout shelter underneath the house, and then when they come in, this is how he visualized it. He says, the Russians will come in, and they will see that there's nobody there, and then they see that there's nothing. It's this old apartment, and there's really nothing there, and they would leave again, and then we could live there. Well, that's not how it happened.
My dad came out first and started looking around, and he looked out of the window, and in the distance he could see the Russian soldiers approaching. And he stayed up there and told us, just stay down, let's just stay down. And then my dad hurried up and came down into the shelter too and pulled the door shut. After a while, everything turned quiet, and my dad very slowly started opening to see if he could see anything. And first thing we saw was a rifle pointing down right through the crack of the door and made us come out.
My mother went first, and she says, please don't shoot. My family is down there. My children are down there. Please don't shoot. And so then we all came up, and then the Russian soldier wanted to see if there are any more people hiding down there. And so he went down, and then he shook his head. He couldn't believe that all of us fit into this little tiny room. And then the Russian soldiers emptying all the clothes out of our closet. And the reason I remember that is because I had just gotten this raincoat, and it was laying there among all the clothes. And I said to my mother, that's my raincoat. And my mother said with sad eyes, nothing belongs to us anymore. And in my little mind, I couldn't understand why my raincoat didn't belong to me anymore. But then we were told we should leave, get out of the house.
There they took my dad prisoner. He was taken away right away. And then we were told to leave too.
When the war was over, then we were allowed to go home, but then I still stayed in WWII. And then the Russians came in, and then we knew that we had to hide, because first we read stories what they had done in farther East Germany than we were, and we just thought, oh, they were just trying to put on a show. Nobody believed all the things that they told us about the Russians. But then later on we found out that it was true what they had told us. And so we had to find different places to hide quite a bit. When the grain started growing, we would hide in gray fields. We would zigzag around the grain field and just lay on the floor. Then the Poles came in, and then one day they picked myself up and my friend Ruth was her name, and they just said we should come to the Polish police station, and they opened it up, and they had Ruth go in one room and me in the other room, and they had these, like the army bunk beds. And then they told us to lay on it face down, and we had no idea what they were going to do. And then they had a club, and with that they beat us with on our back as hard as they could. At first I screamed because naturally it was hurting, and then it seemed to me the more I screamed, the harder he would hit me, so I just ground my teeth together and I just laid there not saying a word. But they hit us 15 times, and then they made us kiss the club and tell them thank you. We have no idea why they did this.
We decided, or my mother decided, I should say, to go east to get behind the Russian front that was coming in, going towards Germany, and circled back and came back into where we lived on our street and walked towards our house and found it was burned down. So the Russians destroyed everything that wasn't bombed out, they burned down.
After some time I got a postcard from my mom, and she wrote in it, "It's very hard to live here. Our house was bombed and they have very little to eat, but we're all right." And then I got a second postcard, and there she said, "We have to either starve to death or we have to go out to Berlin." In Berlin, the mission president was. And so she said we decided to go out, and I cried and I sobbed for the longest time, because I know you weren't supposed to leave. You had to have special permits to leave, and I didn't think I would ever see my family again.
My dad was in a field hospital with typhoid fever and was really sick, really, really sick. That apparently they put him out, that they thought he had died. They put him amongst the dead. People was dying so fast that they didn't have time to, or a chance to even bury him. They put him in a room, laying on the floor, side by side, and they covered him with newspaper.
And my mother went there and knocked on the door, and a man came, had a big beard, you know, really unkempt, and she says, "I'm looking for my husband, Ernst Eichler." And he said, "I am your husband." She didn't recognize her own husband because he looked, you know, his eyes were all sunk in from the typhoid fever. And she took him back to that little hut behind our bombed house. And she says she doesn't know how she did it, but she somehow got him back to health.
They recommended we should go. They told us of a place that Hitler had built. So he opened this mansion up for LDS people that was trying to find refuge till the war settled. The war was finally over, but it was all in turmoil still, that you had to start rebuilding.
When we were in Wolfsgrün, when the mission president said, "Brother Eichler, there are still members in Prussia. Will you go back and get them?" And my dad, you know, that was very dangerous, you know. And he says, "Are you asking me or are you telling me?" He says, well, Brother Eichler, I'm telling you. And he says, okay, I will go back.
And he was so glad he went back because he found my sister Rose and brought Rose back out amongst I don't know how many other LDS people that were still left back there.
So we were there, and there were about 80 people there, 80 refugees. And they were all LDS people. Food was rationed now. But there we had to eat never enough. They had a big bag of oatmeal, but the worms had gotten into it. And so that is what we ate for a while, as long as she could give us that. And most of us would just close our eyes and just eat it. And my sister, she always was the funny one. She would pick the little worms all out. They were just tiny worms. And then she would put them all the edge of her plate to decorate it, she said. But like I said, it was something to eat, and we ate it, and we loved it.
So my sister Rose was the first one to leave. Then my sister Ruth left. And then my brother Ernst left. Then on Valentine's Day, we got to New York in 1957. And I was so overwhelmed with everything. And my mother opened the cupboards, and there was food in all the cupboards. And we had our first wash machine. A Ringer-type wash machine. She just couldn't get over so much wealth.
The Lord helped us through it. He did. We had the faith. We never went to bed or to sleep without prayer. We always prayed. Yes.